Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Tasha's Tales. Today I am joined by Joe. Joe, would you like to say hi?
Hello, everybody.
Would you like to introduce yourself in the best way possible?
Okay, my name is Joe Tosh. What am I? I'm 56. I'm a retired nurse and academic, and I'm a mum. And yeah, and I'm here to talk about Parkinson's.
It's a subject that I'm really quite passionate about in the sense that I know quite a few people within my friendship groups, but also personally in extended family where, people are living with Parkinson's. However, I don't really have the knowledge as such. So I was hoping that, having you could kind of give us an insight into what Parkinson's is and how it impacts people.
Absolutely, I'd be delighted to help with that. Obviously, I'm not the NHS, so there's some really important places to look for information. So you could start off if you were looking. I would go to NHS Direct for sort of a definition and things like that. There's some great videos. There's the Khan Academy, which is a wonderful resource. If you're not sure about anything at all, try looking in the Khan Academy. So they do brilliant videos explaining diagnoses and things like that. And when I was first diagnosed, that's exactly what I did. I went onto the Khan Academy to have a look to see what they had to say about it. But basically, part of our brains produce dopamine, and dopamine's a brilliant chemical. It's used
Mm.
for movement, and it's a happy chemical as well. It's what we get flooded with when we win the lottery, or when our horse comes in, or when we fall in love. And unfortunately, over time, we all lose dopamine. If we all lived to be 140, we would all end up with Parkinson's. But in some people, for some reason, we lose our dopamine making cells. They die more quickly than they do in our counterparts. And this leads to problems with our movement and non-movement, which is as a result of the lack of this dopamine chemical. And so Parkinson's it's not a disease, it's a cluster of symptoms, and there are over 40 of them. So it's quite hard to diagnose at times. But yeah, there are 40 symptoms, and it's a clinical diagnosis based on the presence of things like stiffness, tremor, slowness. But there are a whole host of other things that come along with it.
Wow, that was so beautifully explained, Joe. I didn't quite realize that it's not a disease, but a range of symptoms. That's really interesting. So, in terms of your diagnosis, then, how and when were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed 9 years ago, in fact, 9 years ago, a couple of days ago.
Oh, wow.
So I was 47 when I was diagnosed, and I'd been having symptoms probably for a couple of years beforehand. So those symptoms for me were fatigue. I mean, I really, not just tiredness, but proper fatigue. I had a tremor in my left hand. My handwriting was getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's called micrographia. And that's something that happens. That's a sort of a red flag. My mood was quite low. I was quite depressed for no good reason.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, so there were a whole host of things that were going on that were very easy to write off as something else. I was a woman of a certain age, so could it be
Mm.
hormones? Was the fatigue down to anemia? But eventually, when my handwriting started to diminish, my GP sent me to a neurologist for an assessment, and I was diagnosed on that very first visit.
Gosh, so in terms of your diagnosis, how long did that take altogether? Was it quite quickly that you were diagnosed?
Yeah, it was a 45-minute consultation, and by the end of it, I'd done some, as I say, generally it's a clinical diagnosis, so it's not necessarily based on the results of tests, although we can confirm. Because I was young, I also had an MRI scan to rule out a tumor, a brain tumor, and I also had something called a DAT scan, which actually lights. You're injected with radioactive stuff that then lights up under X-ray conditions so they can see where your dopamine lives and is there any left. So
And
it's
were they able to tell from that test in, with regards to the dopamine?
yeah, the MRI scan showed that I didn't have a tumor. And weirdly, I was absolutely gutted at the time because in
Oh.
my head, I knew that Parkinson's didn't have a cure.
Mm.
But I thought even though a brain tumor would be awful, there might be the opportunity to have it operated on or to have therapy or chemo or something that would help get rid of it. And then therefore there was an opportunity to fight it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then I had it, but there was no tumor. And then I had the DAT scan, and that also confirmed that I was missing quite a lot of dopamine.
Gosh, then as I can completely imagine at 47, is it quite unusual then to be diagnosed with Parkinson's at such a young age?
At the time, I hadn't really I knew about Parkinson's, but I didn't realize about young onset Parkinson's. And I certainly now am in touch through social media with lots and lots of people who had diagnoses at a very young age. So the youngest, there are people with their young kids, people in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s. But the person that I've met who was youngest when he was diagnosed is a great chap called Matt Eagles, and he does masses of work for Parkinson's advocacy. And he was diagnosed when he was 8 years old.
I
So,
really, truly was not aware of that. I think there's that kind of stereotype, isn't it? That Parkinson's normally it's older people who suffer from it, but clearly that's not the case, is it?
well, people are more likely to have Parkinson's as they get older. It's something that we notice and we see and we expect perhaps in an older population. But it's one of the reasons why I do things like the podcasts and the articles and the advocacy that I do is to raise awareness of, firstly, that people who are younger can be diagnosed with Parkinson's, and also that it's not just a male condition. Because if at one point if you were to Google Parkinson's, it was always an old man.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I must say that the kind of my personal experience of knowing people who have Parkinson's, they are predominantly older males, but that's not necessarily a reflection of the true reality of, who has Parkinson's.
it's absolutely a fact that people who are older do get Parkinson's, and it doesn't make it any better to have it when you're older.
No,
I
no,
think
absolutely not.
whenever we get diagnosed, it's always going to be too soon. But I
Mm.
think that there was certainly I felt very isolated when I was first diagnosed, and I read a statistic yesterday saying that 37% of people are they hide their Parkinson's. So there's a big issue around shame.
There's a big taboo, isn't it, in terms, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? We're not open to communicating, and I think it's everyone's business to find out more, and hence why I started the podcast, because I feel like it is my business to know about it, to advocate for it, and to research it, and also to support in the best way possible. So, in over the 9 years, then, Joe, how has Parkinson's impacted your life?
That's an absolutely brilliant question. And it's when I was diagnosed, I cried all the way home, thinking all of the things that were potentially going to disappear. I'd asked my consultant, what did it mean? What was my timeline going to look like? And he said, Joe, we just don't know. You could have 10 years, you could have 30. And I I felt like the carpet had been pulled from under my feet and everything suddenly was different. And I sit here 9 years later and I have lost a lot, but I've also gained a lot.
Yeah.
So my job, I was a nurse and I've had to stop. I'm no longer registered as a nurse, which is desperately awful for me because that's how I feel. That's how I would define myself.
Yeah, it's your identity, isn't it? I think when you're in a profession like nurse or, teacher, or I'm a social worker, that's a huge part of your identity. So I can imagine, you
Yeah,
know,
absolutely. So that felt like a real blow. And I was working as an academic at a local university when I was diagnosed, and that they were brilliantly supportive. But I found that I couldn't concentrate the way that I previously had. I was struggling with fatigue. I was I was just not able to function in the way that I felt that I would reflect well on me. So I ended up being medically retired. So my job went, but into that space fell other things. I decided that once I had some counselling, I managed to get my head wrapped around having Parkinson's. And then I thought, well, if I am going to be in this situation with this awful condition, I'm going to try, if I'm going to have a limited time of being physically well, I'd better make the best of things whilst I can still do them.
Yeah.
And so I did what I could to basically to share my experience authentically with other people on social media. And I started saying yes to things that I previously would have put off. So I'd always wanted to go to the Chelsea Flower Show, and for 25 years
Oh wow, yes.
I thought I'm going to go, and then didn't go, and then I went, and I did I just all sorts of things. I did yoga at the Natural History Museum. I started doing activities, going to just I can't even think about. There's so many things. It's sort of it's mind blowing. But my quality of life started to really improve, and the connections that I made, and the sort of the kindness that I was met with, and
Yeah.
the support from other people who have Parkinson's online has just been insane. It's been brilliant, and there's been losses, and there's been benefits. I mean, I've done a TED talk.
Yes, I
I've done
believe you have, and you did that in Warrington, didn't you?
I did, yes, TEDxWarrington, which was
That is
again I've never been able
incredible.
to do. I've won all sorts of awards. I've done beach cleaning. I've set up a business on Etsy. Yeah, I mean, I've tried to be a good mum. I've become a granny.
Oh,
It's just
congratulations.
thank you. But yeah, I thought when I was driving home from the hospital on that very first day, I wept tears because I thought if I ever become a grandparent, I'm not going to be able to hold the baby.
Oh,
And it broke my heart. It really did. But
yeah.
I now have a little chap in my life who's 4 months old, who's
Oh
had
gosh.
lots of struggles. And I'm not saying that I'm the safest pair of hands, but I'm definitely we've worked out how to how to make it work and how to make it safe. And he's definitely had cuddles from his granny.
Yeah, and he needs that as well, doesn't he? That's absolutely gorgeous. How many children do you have?
I've got two girls, and
Okay.
that's probably something else to mention as well, is that Parkinson's doesn't just impact on the person who is experiencing it. It has a terrible, terrible cost for those people who are who go from being children or parents or friends or partners to being carers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was thinking about it, for me as a mum with two children and thinking about my own mum, I think it's human nature to think, isn't it? And I was thinking, gosh, I can't imagine for as a daughter myself, the
Mm.
kind of, I suppose, the fears that you would have and the concern that you would have about your mum. Can only imagine how much difficult it must have been for your daughters as well.
I think that with all of us, we've had to make adjustments and transitions, and hopefully, I'm very lucky that I've got this support network, but there are lots of people who get their diagnoses and who going home to an empty house because they don't have a support network, or people who are currently, I think about people in refugee camps, for example, who
Gosh,
are
yeah.
experiencing all of this, but they haven't got any support networks because they're not at home and they don't have the clinical support that I've been lucky enough to have. So, despite the fact that it's difficult, I've also been offered. I was offered, and I had something called deep brain stimulation, which is a surgical procedure I had about nearly 3 years ago to help with my symptoms, and that's a therapy that I was able to get on the NHS, but that, for example, my friends who live with Parkinson's who are in the States have to pay for that, or they have to get it on
Wow.
their insurance.
Okay. And
Um,
what did that surgery consist of?
it sounds really awful. So if anybody feels a bit squeamish, stick your fingers in your ears and go la 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 for a
I
moment.
have
But
no choice, Joe. I'm going to have to listen now that I've asked.
I'll keep it as light as I can. So if you think about people who maybe have a pacemaker
Yeah.
in their chest, So I have a device that sits in my chest, and
Okay.
it's connected by a wire that goes from my chest up through my neck to two electrodes that sit in my brain that are probably about the length of my hand. So
Okay.
there are two of those, and we're not entirely certain how it works, but it works. Whether it disrupts the signals that are causing problems with the movement element of Parkinson's. So it's only good for the movement side of things. It doesn't change the non-motor symptoms, but it makes a massive difference to my physicality and my ability to move and you know just crack on with the day basically.
That is fantastic. And that you had that procedure done in three years ago.
Yes, I did, and I mean that was just that. I worked with Parkinson's UK, and we I had a film crew who followed me around and captured the experience from my first meeting with my consultant, sort of at home, to the actual operation. So the it was called DBS and Me,
Oh
and
wow.
it's
Okay.
on YouTube.
On YouTube, what I'll do is I'll share the link on the description of the episode because I bet people would want to kind of follow your journey and support you. And do you feel kind of can you feel the benefits from that surgery?
I definitely can because I managed to switch it off by accident the other day.
Oh dear.
I know I can't be trusted with technology apparently. Yeah, so it was yeah, there's a big red button that basically says don't press me and I
You
managed to
pressed
press it
it.
back.
Yeah, I'm a
And I
bit of a technophobe. You're in a good company there.
so I spent a terrible night. I was unable to turn
Oh,
over in bed. I mean, I
oh
felt
my
like somebody had
goodness.
sprayed quick setting cement on me. That's the nearest to it I can describe. It was horrible, really horrible. I felt so trapped in my body. And I think that's one of the things that I felt that I think other people with Parkinson's have said that they felt they've sort of it's resonated with them is there's this feeling that you just want to unzip yourself and
Oh,
climb out because obviously it's an unpleasant thing to shake all the time or to have dystonia, which is a
mm,
cramp. Lots of people with Parkinson's experience pain and it's generally quite awful.
yeah, it
Um,
sounds really, really, really tough. But I can hear it in your voice constantly, that oomph for life, that optimism, that, glass half full. And I bet that's quite infectious for kind of the community that you engage in and the support system that you have. I can hear it.
Well, I hope so because none of us know. I have this sort of pipe dream that at some point there's going to be a news article that says they finally found a cure for
Yeah.
Parkinson's. And at that point, I'd like to be able to think, crikey, if it hadn't have been for Parkinson's, I wouldn't have done all of these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than thinking, because I thought I had Parkinson's, I went to bed and I pulled the carpet, the covers over my head and kept under there. Because, we get one life, don't we? That's it,
Yeah.
all of us. And it's such a privilege to be, you know, to be, for me to even be here at 56. There are
Yeah.
lots of people who haven't had that opportunity. And
And you've
so, yeah,
grabbed the opportunities with both hands, haven't you? It sounds like you've absolutely made the most of it.
I hope so. I'd like to think so. And I think, I'd like to think that when I do, when my kids are a little bit older, when they're not, again, immersed in their own experiences at the moment, but at some point for them to think that I made the best of things and I try to be a good mum and I try to leave things in a better place than when I started. That's kind of what I'd like to think that I've done is help the people who are coming behind me.
Yeah, and you're already doing that. The fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that you have raised awareness, even for me, I will take this conversation and hold it and cherish it, and hopefully be able to raise some money as well for Parkinson's UK. As someone who has Parkinson's, at the minute, what treatment is there?
There are there are tablets that one can take. There's not a massive, great big buffet of tablets that are available, and some of them are pretty dated. So one of the major medications that people take with Parkinson's is called levodopa, and that's a medication that was started to become popular and very effective in the 1950s. But there's not been Parkinson's has been slightly under the radar for a very long time, and people like Michael J. Fox have done a huge amount to help. But yeah, so taking the medication's helpful, surgery can be helpful, eating well, but
Okay.
exercise is amazing for it. Exercise is one of the very few things which we know helps keep symptoms at bay. I mean,
What
it's good
kind of
for
exercises would you say? Is that like strength based or cardio or
it'll
just
depend. So
walk?
it's anything really, whether it's chair based, whether or not it's water, whether it's in water to help people, hydrotherapy or
Okay.
go for a walk or walking football. I mean, if there are some Parkinson's groups which do walking football, which are really popular, there's so many people out there doing wonderful things to try and encourage people to get out there. Yoga is great, Tai Chi, anything really that
Yeah.
gets us moving and gets us using our bodies. And there's things like choirs as well, things like our voices disappear. So Parkinson's, we can lose our facial muscle expression and we can end up with a mask face. So I don't know if you think about people like Muhammad Ali, who
Yeah.
such a sort of a dazzlingly alive
Charismatic man.
character.
Yeah.
There was such a sort of a face full of movement and character, but by
Yeah.
the end of his life, it was as I say, it's almost like he had lost all of that movement. So things like face yoga and exercising one's voice in a choir would be helpful to keep your voice strong because it's a muscle like everything
Yeah.
else.
Oh, thank you for that, Joe. I really appreciate that. I have one question that I've been wanting to ask because I know a couple of kind of friends who have loved ones who've been diagnosed with Parkinson's. What advice do you think you could give to someone who has a loved one with this condition?
I think we all, it's so weird, isn't it? We all want what we want, and I wouldn't dare presume to know. What I found helpful was to have people who were happy to talk about it and who didn't make me feel ashamed about it, for it to be something that became normal, and I think just to have the time to work through. Everybody kind of works through processes at their own time, so it's a bit like, I don't know if you've seen the stages of grief where people go through things
Yeah.
like anger, denial, bargaining, and eventually they get through to acceptance if we're lucky. And I think that I've gone through all of those different stages, and everybody does that in their own pace, and you don't necessarily hit every single stage. But if you've got somebody who has Parkinson's and they're behaving like a bit of an unpleasant human, it could just be that they're trying to process it. I've definitely tried to push people away in the past because I've thought I don't want them to feel responsible for me if I'm going to be ill. I mean, my marriage, for example, hasn't survived, but weirdly, I'm now in a relationship with somebody who's chosen to be with me,
Oh wow. Well,
even though
congratulations for that.
I was
That's amazing.
so I'm happily in love and being loved and with somebody who knows exactly what the future might look like or not. We just don't know. But somebody who's made a decision based on the reality of my situation now, and that's been. I never in a million years thought that I would be able to say something like that.
Isn't that wonderful though? But I think that, this conversation for me is so uplifting because it is a reflection of what you bring to the table, and that's just this absolute desire to live life to the absolute max.
Well, I think and what I would say as well is that to whoever's listening, whether they've got Parkinson's or not, is that this is not a drill. And if we all of us have things maybe in our wardrobe, that something that we save for best, the best and most beautiful thing that we own, and we might wear it once or twice, and just wear the good stuff all the time and float about where, go to the shops in your best frock and, use the good hand cream and, just enjoy it. Life is for living and it's not a drill. And when I've very sadly my dad died recently, and he had a great life. It was a pleasure to write his eulogy because it was full of anecdotes, and nobody really will ever say, if as and when I pop my clogs, no one's going to say, "Oh, do you remember Joe? Do you remember her sofa? Do you remember her soft furnishings? Do you remember the stuff she
Yeah.
had?" No one's
Mhm.
going to care what face cream I use. No one's going to care what brand of shoe I wore. But they might be able to say, "Do you remember when we did this?" And do you remember when we did the? It's experiences which are important.
Isn't that
Um,
so true? And you're left with kind of these wholesome conversations and remembering people for kind of the positive things.
Absolutely. When my kids were little, one of my daughters thought that I was a dentist for years. I mean, so yes, it's important to work and to work hard and whatnot, but the people who generally care for us don't really care about that. And in somebody's eulogy, quite often work will be one or two sentences, or you think you can give 30, 40 years to an occupation,
Yeah.
flog your puddings out for it. And so it's about having that work-life balance and about recognizing that there's always something to be grateful for.
Do you think being a nurse was more of a hindrance or a help with your diagnosis?
Again, that's a really brilliant question. Probably a bit of both. It was a hindrance because I knew a little bit about what to expect and then probably catastrophized about it a little bit. And
Yeah.
but it was also helpful because I'd had so many amazing patients in my career. I used to work in cardiology and coronary
Oh,
care.
did you really?
I did, and
Wow.
I spoke to lots of people who had very, very good advice for me because they'd woken up and realized that they weren't 20 anymore, they were 60 and they'd just had a heart attack and life was looking quite scary. And they gave me great advice. Don't buy large electricals until you're ready to settle down. Travel as much as you can and, be kind, explore the world. And, I listened to them and did exactly that.
Yeah, and yeah, you really have, haven't you? And in terms of support groups, what support groups would you say are out there for people, either people who have got Parkinson's themselves or their loved ones? What's out there?
There are many, many different ways to access support, and some of them are quite formal. Some of them have been set up by somebody who just takes matters into their own hands and thinks, right, well, there doesn't seem to be anything here, so I'm going to start it myself.
Okay.
Um, but things like Parkinson's UK is a good place to start. But if you go on any kind of social media, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or just the internet, and type in Parkinson's support group or Parkinson's support group for partners or for carers, you'll find something. Although I would caution that not all groups. Some groups are amazing, but not all groups are going to be for everybody. And sometimes people who have I tend to like to focus on the positives, and if there's people who are having a really difficult time, that can sometimes be quite negative or
Yeah.
hard for me to cope with because I can't do anything about it. I'm so just about keeping my head above water sometimes, and
Yeah.
it's about where you put your energy, I suppose. But there are some great online classes.
Okay, that's amazing. And have your daughter sought any support dealing with your diagnosis and helping you? Is there anything that they've done?
I think that they probably talk with family, they probably talk with their nearest and dearest, with their partners, and they talk to me. We're very open and honest about situations. So if they're worried about something, they can talk to me about it, which has been, again, not everybody would do that. Lots of people want to protect their children or their partners from the realities, but that's not kind of how I like to do business, because what I wanted to say to them is if I say that I'm good, you can absolutely know that I'm good. If I'm not, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So they're not going to have to second guess that on top of everything else.
Yeah. And I love that you get to spend time with your grandson now, and you've had the opportunity, the time to be there for him and watch him getting bigger as well. I bet that's a wonderful, wonderful feeling.
It's absolutely the best thing ever. I highly recommend becoming a grandparent. Um, yeah, it's that gives me lots of dopamine as well. I think doing things, laughing, things that make me happy. I mean, I've got some friends who are just brilliant and who have an uncanny ability to bring joy into my life. And we do all sorts of mad things, whether it's fundraising. We've done silent discos and you know all sorts of stuff which has been of benefit. And
Fantastic.
I've talked a lot about Parkinson's UK, but there is another Parkinson's charity called Cure Parkinson's, and they do less of the sort of supporting element, and everything that they do is about finding a cure. That's really important because at the end of the day, that's really what we want more than
Yeah,
anything.
absolutely. It is the research and the cure that we need to be raising awareness, but also then finding out which charities to support as well. So I'll be sharing the links of those as well. So what's the next big thing for you then, Joe, before we part ways? What's the next big thing that you're looking forward to and something that I can look out for?
Well, I've been invited, the company who made the kit that sits in my chest and in my head,
Yeah.
they have invited me to be on their patient advisory board. So that's something that I'm now I have regular meetings. So I was invited out to Milan earlier this year to go to join them. And we've had a couple of online meetings since, but it's trying to improve the experience of the patients who are coming behind us, all the patients who are on that group. And that's really amazing. So I've got another one of those to come later on this year. And
That's
also
fantastic.
I teach the student nurses on the adult nursing program at the university that I previously worked at. So that's something that I could do to keep my hand in. And yeah, so I'm public speaking. I'm hopefully going to share my story a little bit more with different groups of people to try and uplift them and to educate them about Parkinson's.
Honestly, I can't thank you enough for your time, Joe. It's been an absolute pleasure and a privilege to talk to you and for you to give me your time. I really, really appreciate it. I feel like it's been an eye-opening conversation for me.
Well, you've been amazing. You've asked some fantastic questions, and
Oh,
you've been a
thank you.
wonderful. Yeah, yeah. You've been very patient and kind, and it's always a privilege to get to speak about this because somebody somewhere who listens to this, even if it's just one person, learns something that helps them get through the day, then it's absolutely worth it. So thank
Yeah.
you again for taking the time and for reaching out to
No,
me.
thank you for them. This is dedicated, to all my loved ones who are supporting family or family members or friends with Parkinson's. This is my way of saying I see you, I support you, and yeah, well, trying my bit as well here. So thank you.
That's amazing. Well done, you.
Thank you.